The gun went off at 7:43 in the evening, and the first thing Nadia thought was that someone had dropped a tray. That's what her brain did with it. Filed the sound under catering accident and kept moving, kept smiling at the florist who was adjusting the centerpiece on table 6, kept pretending that this rehearsal dinner was going exactly as planned, and that the man she was marrying tomorrow hadn't been in the coat room for the last 22 minutes with her maid of honor. Then the second shot came, and then the screaming. She had worked the numbers on this wedding for 4 months. That was the thing nobody understood about Nadia Cooke. She didn't plan events the way other people planned events. She didn't make mood boards or pin flowers to cork boards. She made spreadsheets. She tracked every dollar, every vendor deposit, every cancellation clause. She knew that the rehearsal dinner at the Ashford Grand was costing her future in-laws $34,000, that the floral bill alone was $8,200, that the cake, the 3-tiered ivory fondant monstrosity she had picked because Trevor said it looked classy, was $2,400. She knew the numbers because the numbers were the only thing she could control. Everything else about the last 2 years with Trevor Ashford had felt like standing on ice that was slowly cracking beneath her feet. She came from Millbrook, which was the kind of small town that people from small towns are always trying to leave. Her father had run a hardware store until he couldn't anymore. Her mother had worked 2 jobs until her knees gave out. Nadia had gotten herself a scholarship to state, gotten herself a bookkeeping certificate, gotten herself a job at a mid-size accounting firm in the city. And then she had met Trevor at a client event, and he had looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the room. Later, she would understand that Trevor Ashford looked at everyone like that. It was a skill he'd developed over a lifetime of wanting things from people. But back then, she had believed it. She had believed a lot of things. The coat room was on the east side of the ballroom, past the bar cart and the string quartet that was playing something she'd specifically requested because Trevor said it reminded him of the weekend they spent in Charleston. She found out later that he'd never actually been to Charleston. He'd told her that story to impress her, and then forgotten he'd told it, and then doubled down when she mentioned it again. She wasn't looking for him when she walked past the coat room. She was looking for the venue coordinator because one of the candle arrangements on the head table was listing slightly to the left, and it was going to drive her insane all night if she didn't fix it. She heard Madeline's laugh first. Madeline had a very specific laugh, low and a little breathless, the kind of laugh that meant she was performing enjoyment for someone she wanted something from. Nadia had known Madeline since college. She knew every register of that laugh. She stopped walking. The coat room door was not fully closed. It was open maybe 3 inches, which was enough. She stood in the hallway of the Ashford Grand, in the dress she'd bought for $340 at a sampled sale, because she'd wanted to save money for the wedding. And she listened to the man she was marrying tomorrow tell her best friend that he'd figure out how to end things with Nadia after the honeymoon, that it was easier this way, that she needed to stop worrying so much. She needed to stop worrying. Nadia stood very still for a long moment. Then she walked back to the ballroom, picked up a glass of sparkling water from the nearest tray, and sat down at table 6 and stared at the candle arrangement that was listing slightly to the left. She didn't cry. That surprised her later. She'd expected to cry. Instead, she felt something go very quiet inside her, like a spreadsheet closing, like a file being saved and then shut down. That was when the first shot went off. She learned afterward that it came from outside. 2 men in the parking structure. Something to do with a debt that had nothing to do with the Ashford family, and everything to do with the building they were standing in. The Ashford Grand had apparently been operating for the last 3 years under an arrangement with a family called Vane. No, wait, that wasn't right. She was getting confused later with names she'd read in a newspaper. She never got the details completely straight. What she knew was this: the shots sent the ballroom into chaos. Guests were running. The string quartet had stopped mid-phrase. Someone knocked over one of the candle arrangements, not the listing one on the head table, a different one, and for a moment, Nadia thought the tablecloth was going to catch fire. She didn't run. She wasn't sure why. Maybe she was still sitting with what she'd heard in the hallway. Maybe she'd already used up her panic allocation for the evening. She sat at table 6 with her glass of sparkling water and watched the room empty out around her, and she thought, $34,000. For this. That was when she became aware of the men in dark suits moving through the ballroom with a kind of professional calm that had nothing to do with the venue security. They weren't running. They weren't shouting into radios. They moved like water moving around obstacles, quiet, deliberate, purposeful. And behind them, walking like the room belonged to him, was a man she had never seen before in her life. He was tall, not in the way that Trevor was tall. Trevor was 6 feet and proud of it in a way that always felt slightly compensatory. This man was tall the way buildings are tall, like height was just a structural fact about him rather than an achievement. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie, and his face was. She searched for the word later and couldn't find one that fit. Not handsome, exactly, though he was. Carved was closer, like something that had been made with intention, and then weathered into something harder than the original material. He had a scar along his jaw that disappeared into his collar. He scanned the room with the methodical attention of someone checking inventory, and then his eyes landed on her, and he stopped. She didn't look away. That was another thing that surprised her later, that she didn't look away. He crossed the room toward her. His men stayed where they were. He stopped at table 6, looked at her, looked at the glass of water in her hand, looked at the emptied ballroom around her. "You're not running," he said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to take up space in a room. "No," she said. "Why not?" She looked down at the candle arrangement on the table, still listing slightly to the left. "I just found out my fiancé has been sleeping with my best friend. I think I've hit my limit for urgency tonight." Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, she wouldn't have called it that, more like recalibration. "Nikolai dressed," he said. She understood that was his name, Nadia Cooke. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, which was not what she expected. Nothing about the next 20 minutes was what she expected. His men had secured the building. That was the phrase he used, secured, in the same tone someone might use to say checked the mail. The 2 men in the parking structure had been, in his words, handled, which she decided not to ask follow-up questions about. The guests had been escorted to a side entrance and were being seen to. Trevor, she found out later, had run out through the kitchen with Madeline. Nadia sat across from Nikolai dressed at table 6 and felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding tension in their body for so long that when it finally releases, there's nothing left underneath it. "You work in accounting," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "I know who Trevor Ashford is. I know who his family is. I looked into his associates when this venue came under." He paused. "When I had a reason to look and you looked into me, I look into everyone." She considered this. "And what did you find?" "That you're not one of them." He said it like it was a data point. "Your firm does mid-market bookkeeping, nothing interesting. You signed a venue contract and a catering contract and a florist contract that gave you 0 leverage if anything went wrong." "I know," she said. "I saw the clauses. I didn't have enough in savings to negotiate better terms." Something changed in his face again, that same recalibration. "How much does your firm pay you?" he said. "That's a strange question. I have a reason for asking," she told him. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because the night had already detonated every normal social protocol she might otherwise have followed. He listened, and then he was quiet for a moment, and then he said something she had not anticipated in any version of how this evening was supposed to go. "I need a bookkeeper," he said. "Not an accountant, not a forensic auditor. A bookkeeper. Someone who can look at numbers and understand what they're actually saying. I imagine that's a specialized need," she said carefully. "In your line of work, most people I hire are afraid of me," he said. "That creates a problem. Afraid people make errors. They omit things. They round in the wrong direction because they'd rather show me a clean number than a real one." He looked at her steadily. You sat in an empty ballroom after 2 gunshots and finished your water. I don't think you're afraid of me. I'm not unafraid of you, she said. I'm just too tired to perform it right now. For the first time, the very first time, something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile, but was in the same family as one. 6 months, he said. You work for me. Your salary is, and he named a number that made the candle arrangement swim slightly in her vision. If you want out after 6 months, you leave with what you've earned, and I have a car take you anywhere you want to go. No questions. And if I want to stay, then we renegotiate. Nadia looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her apartment, which was a sublet she'd been planning to give up when she moved into Trevor's place after the wedding. She thought about her savings account, which had been significantly depleted by 4 months of vendor deposits. She thought about Madeline's laugh in the coat room, and Trevor saying it's easier this way, and the $2,400 fondant cake that was presumably still sitting somewhere in the kitchen. I want that in writing, she said. He looked at her like she'd said something interesting. Obviously, he said. She called her sister from the car. Her sister, Dana, said, Wait, so you're not getting married tomorrow? No, and you're going to work for, who is this person? His name is Dressed. That's not a name. It's his name. Dana was quiet for a moment. Nadia, are you okay? Nadia looked out the window at the city moving past. She thought about the question. She thought about whether okay was the right metric, whether okay was what she was aiming for, whether she had ever in her adult life actually been okay, or whether she'd just been very good at making the columns balance. I'll let you know, she said. Dressed's operation was headquartered in a building in the warehouse district that looked, from the outside, like a decommissioned textile company. Inside it was something else. Clean lines, controlled temperature, server towers humming behind glass, men moving through corridors with the particular efficiency of people who have been trained to waste nothing. His financial operation was, by any objective measure, a disaster. Not in the obvious way, not in the way that would show up in a cursory review. On the surface, everything balanced. But Nadia spent her first 3 days going through the books, with the patience she'd developed over 6 years of mid-market accounting. And what she found underneath the surface was a system held together with assumptions and loyalty, and the implicit understanding that no one was going to look too closely. She looked closely. She built a new system in a spreadsheet that she backed up in 3 locations, and on the 5th day she walked into Dressed's office, which was on the top floor and had windows that looked out over the river, and set her laptop in front of him and showed him what she'd found. He read through it in silence. She stood there and let him read. She'd learned by then that Dressed didn't fill silence the way most people did. He just let it exist. When he finished, he looked up at her. This is a $2.3 million exposure, he said. Yes! How long has this been building? Roughly 14 months. It accelerated after. She checked her notes. After your previous bookkeeper left. He didn't leave, Dress said. He was removed. I understood the implication, she said. The timing still stands. He was quiet again. Then, can you fix it? I already started. He looked at the spreadsheet again. She watched him look at it, watched him trace the logic of what she'd done, the way the columns now told a different story, a real one. You restructured the entire receivables categorization, he said. The old system was optimized to look clean. I restructured it to be accurate. Those are different things. Always, she said. Most people prefer clean. He looked at her then, really looked at her, in a way he hadn't before, in a way that she felt like a physical thing, like pressure. You're not most people, he said. She picked up her laptop. I need access to the offshore statements. The current summary you gave me is missing the Q3 variants. He opened his desk drawer and handed her a key card without hesitation. She took it and left. The months had a rhythm she hadn't expected. She showed up. She worked. She found things. She told him what she found, even when what she found was uncomfortable. Especially when it was uncomfortable, because she had decided early on that the only value she had to him was her willingness to show him the real number instead of the clean one, and she was not going to compromise that for anything. He paid her on the 1st of every month, exactly what he'd promised, in a transfer that arrived at 7 a.m. with a precision that felt almost personal. They had a standing meeting every Tuesday at noon, which was when she presented her weekly summary. He asked questions that were sharp and specific. She answered them. Occasionally he disagreed with her interpretation of something, and they argued about it, and sometimes she was right, and sometimes he was, and neither of them pretended otherwise. She ate lunch at her desk most days. Occasionally his people brought her food without being asked. Nothing dramatic, just a sandwich, coffee, the kind of consideration that was practical rather than warm. She didn't read into it. She was very careful not to read into anything. She knew what he was. She had read enough, pieced together enough from the ledgers she worked through every day to understand the shape of what Nikolai Drest ran and what he was willing to do to run it. She was not naive about this. She filed it in the same mental column as, "The ice is cracking beneath your feet." Something to be aware of, something to account for. She just did not leave. The problem arrived in month 4, in the form of a man named Garrett Wills. Wills was a mid-level broker who handled a portion of Drest's legitimate real estate interests. The face layer of the operation, the part that existed to give everything else a place to point to when someone asked questions. He was, by the ledgers, performing adequately. By everything else, he was stealing, not aggressively, not in a way that would make the columns scream. Just a small, consistent, patient skimming, the kind that required someone to be looking at the numbers with genuine attention rather than professional adequacy. Nadia found it on a Wednesday morning, confirmed it by Thursday afternoon, and presented it to Drest on Friday. He didn't react visibly. He rarely did. He read through what she'd put together, the timeline, the mechanism, the total exposure, the trajectory if it continued, and when he finished he set the papers down on his desk and was quiet for a moment. "You're certain," he said. "I flagged 2 interpretations," she said. "One is an honest error in his commission calculations. The other is deliberate extraction. The second interpretation requires assuming he made the same error 43 times in the same direction, over 18 months. Drest looked at the papers. "He's been with me for 6 years. She didn't say anything. It wasn't her place to say anything about that part. "Do you know how many people have been with me for 6 years?" he said. "I can see from payroll that it's not many." He looked up at her. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it, not as a performance, not as a social lubricant. She meant it the way she'd have meant it if her own sister had done something to betray her. Because she understood by now that loyalty was the thing Drest valued above almost everything else, and that it was also the thing most likely to be used against him. "You could have buried this," he said, "made it disappear inside another category. He would never have known you'd found it." "Why would I do that?" "Because Garrett Wills is not a man you want as an enemy, and because I would never have known either." She held his gaze. "You hired me to show you the real number." "Yes," he said, "that's the real number." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the papers and folded them precisely in half. "I'll handle it." She nodded and picked up her bag to leave. "Nadia." She stopped. She couldn't remember him using her first name before. He called her Cooke when he called her anything at all. "The variant you found in the Q3 offshore statements," he said. "The $340,000 line, the one you said was a timing difference in the Tokyo transfer. I was wrong about that." She turned around. "I know. You knew when I said it." "Yes. Why didn't you push back harder?" She considered the question. "Because you needed to come to it yourself. You weren't ready to hear it from me that day, so I waited until you were." She paused. The number didn't change. He looked at her for a long time. "Stay past 6 months," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't exactly a request either. It was the closest she'd ever heard him come to asking for something. She thought about her sublet, which she'd renewed twice now. She thought about her savings account, which was in considerably better shape. She thought about the Tuesday meetings and the sandwiches that appeared on her desk, and the way she had started to understand, from the ledgers, how his mind worked. The architecture of how he thought about debt and loyalty and consequence, the way everything in his world was a form of accounting. She thought about how she hadn't thought about Trevor in weeks. "Renegotiate the terms," she said, "like you said we would." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a document that, when she looked at it, contained terms she had not expected, terms that gave her not just a salary, but an ownership stake in the legitimate side of the operation, a percentage small enough to be safe but meaningful enough to be real. She looked up at him. "You drafted this before I said anything," she said. "I draft scenarios in advance," he said. "It's more efficient. How long ago did you draft it?" He didn't answer that, but she could see, in the date field at the bottom of the document, that it had been prepared 6 weeks earlier. She sat down across from him. "The Tokyo variants," she said. "I need you to walk me through your reasoning one more time. I want to understand how you got to the timing interpretation. Now, you said you were wrong. I want to know how you got there, so I can flag it if it comes up in a different form." He looked at her for a moment. That look that she'd stopped trying to decode because it was too layered, because every time she thought she had the structure of it, she found another row she hadn't accounted for. Then he opened the drawer again and pulled out the file, and she uncapped her pen and she stayed. 6 months later, someone asked her, her sister Dana at Thanksgiving, over a table that Nadia had paid for and cooked for and organized down to the last detail, someone asked her if she was happy. She thought about the question the way she thought about most questions. She looked for the real number underneath the clean one. She thought about the Tuesday meetings, which had long since expanded past noon and sometimes ran until the building went quiet around them. She thought about the moment last month when she'd caught a discrepancy in a vendor contract and shown it to Drest, and he had looked at what she'd found and said, without preamble, "I wouldn't have seen that," which was the most significant thing she'd heard him say in the entire time she'd known him, because it meant something real coming from a man who didn't offer assessments he didn't mean. She thought about the fact that she had stopped tracking the exit in every room she walked into. That was new. She hadn't noticed when it happened. "I think I'm getting there," she told Dana. Dana looked at her for a long moment, the way older sisters look at you when they've been worried and are trying to decide if they still need to be. "Is he good to you?" she asked. Nadia thought about the sandwiches on her desk. She thought about the document with the date 6 weeks earlier. She thought about the way Drest said her name, Nadia, like a thing he was careful with. "He's honest with me," she said, "which is more than I had before." Dana seemed to consider this. "That's a strange thing to say about a man like that." "He's a strange man," she said, "but the numbers don't lie, and neither does he." Dana reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Nadia squeezed back. Outside, the city did what cities do, kept moving, kept humming, kept accumulating its debts and its dividends and its small private reckonings. And somewhere across town, in a building that looked like a decommissioned textile company, the books were balanced, and the real numbers were exactly where they should be. And for the first time in a long time, so was she.